Hello music lovers, welcome back. The subject of today's video came from a kind of happy accident that occurred on last week's live stream. Let me tell you what happened so I can give you the context. First of all, I must apologise to all of you who came to the live stream asking for either a track roast or track feedback. Some technical difficulties meant I had to restart the stream, and that caused the title of the video to revert to the one from last week, which was roasting my viewers' tracks. Not the sound design challenge it was supposed to be. Whoops. What resulted was a very confused me and a very confused audience. As for about the first hour, I was expecting sound design challenges, and instead I was getting requests for track feedback. Again, my apologies. However, this did cause a discussion, which many of you have since expressed was very useful. I think the topic deserves its own video, so here we are. Let's tackle the big one. Why do you sound amateur? I'm going to be upfront with you on this one. This video is clickbait, because the reason you sound amateur is, wait for it, drum roll please, it's because you are an amateur. Now, before you click away, hear me out. Let me tell you why being an amateur could actually be your advantage. Let's talk about that term, amateur. What does that really mean? It's typically used as an antonym to professional, inferring that you are an amateur until you are a professional. So a professional is someone who gets paid, right? It's when it's your paid time versus your pastime. So the first track I was ever paid to mix, does that make that track professional? The mix I did for a whole £50? Was that professional work? Did that track sound professional? Probably not. Maybe you define professional as being released on a label, or big label, or maybe it's a certain type of sound quality you are aiming for. Regardless of your definition, I propose you let go of this concept of professional or amateur. After all, history is littered with examples of so-called unprofessional acts or tracks that have gone viral. Was Stormzy a professional when he recorded Shut Up on the built-in mic of the camera? Does Spot'em-Got'em's beatbox sound professional? And likewise, in the opposite direction, there have been many professional sounding tracks from professional labels in million-dollar studios with million-dollar marketing budgets that could not sell even 1,000 copies. Now, don't get me wrong, I've been there as well. Before music became my living, I would always aspire to sound like my heroes. That's perfectly normal. The mistake everyone makes at that stage, though, is associating the sound with the success. But we live in very different times now. Before 2005, the only artists who really sounded professional were part of the industry. You needed the money from a big record label to pay for your studio time, a studio which contained lots of expensive gear. That gear wasn't obtainable anywhere else, certainly not at home, and it was operated by a dedicated mix engineer in a dedicated room, and it was also sent to a dedicated mastering house as well. And regardless of the results, that whole process just looks like a lot of fun, or it's certainly very fascinating. It's really easy to get drawn to that. But today, professional sound can not only be achieved at home, it's more likely to be just what trended last. It can change from year to year, month to month, week to week even. Any amateur song which accompanies a viral cat video from TikTok could be the next sound. And the truth is, a record label is more likely to sign that kind of track than any track purely based on its sound. Now, even if you do manage to achieve this professional sound, let me tell you why I think that is actually a disadvantage. Imagine you came to me as a mix engineer and asked me to make you sound like James Hype. Okay, no problem, I can do that. Now suddenly, overnight, you sound like James Hype. Now what? Do you think if you sounded just as professional as James Hype, that you would have any of James Hype's success? Would an audience of real listeners think of you as an alternative or a copycat? Would a record label sign you up because you sounded similar? Or would they just go with the act that they know can sell tickets? So clearly, the professional sound isn't the only factor, but is it even a requirement? You see, music is about feeling, it's about emotions, it's about communication, as with all art. Real listeners do not identify professional sound or amateur sound. It's either appropriate for the message and the emotion of the track, or it's not. Imagine this scenario for a minute. You, a brand new act, let's say 300 followers on Spotify, and you have 3 tracks, all which sound super professional, polished, as good as the best out there. For the average listener, is that not a red flag? Even if they can't identify why something is off, that would seem strange, no? I'm going to propose you do the opposite. Your sound needs to be exactly as good as your social profile. As an amateur, you need to own it. An artist with 200 followers needs to sound like an artist that has 200 followers. As the fantastic Gregory Scott said last month, a common trap we fall into is getting feedback from our peers. But the problem is, our peers are other engineers, other producers, other musicians. They are the opposite of a real audience. With 100,000 tracks uploaded every day to Spotify alone, you better not sound like everyone else. By all means, you can come to this channel and learn the basic principles where we break down how some of the greats do it, but have in mind the entire time that the goal is not professional sound. The goal is, how do I stand out amongst 100,000 other tracks? This is where an amateur's advantage lies. What sounds amateur to you and your peers may just be a really fresh sound to a genuine listener who is reacting emotionally. What's more, if you don't sound professional, it's more endearing to your early adopters. Your earliest fans are your most passionate. These are the ones that seek out new music because it is new, not because it sounds like other stuff. These are the audience that will help you build a career. The ones that will travel to see you, pay for tickets, and support you. But most of all, grow with you. You take on your first group of super fans when you are an amateur. As they watch you improve, they will be all the more invested, having shared the journey. One professional trait you should be aiming for is the ability to try things and then let go. One thing I see amateurs struggling with most is the reality that it is not for me or you to say what is good. It is for them, your audience. In my Tech House video, titled Why You Don't Sound Like West End and Mau P, there were inevitable comments asking, why would I want to sound like this artist? I want to be original. Obviously, the format of that video was just a vehicle for learning, but it does raise a great point. One way to avoid following everyone else's rules and sounding like them is not to know the rules in the first place. Be naive. As we discussed in last week's Press and Guess video, you could say press and guess is an amateur approach to music creation. But it's these approaches that give us rave music, hip-hop, punk. So why do you sound amateur? Because you are, and that's a good thing. Own it and grow it. If you can overcome the fear of releasing ideas into the world which are not finished in your mind, not only will you become a professional faster, probably be a more original artist by the time you get there too. As the great Seth Godin once said, what are you going to do with all those ducks when they are finally in a row? Okie dokie, I'm going to leave it there. As always, I hope you learned something. If you did, you know what to do. You can press some of those virtual buttons, or if you're feeling extra generous, you can buy me a coffee with the link in the description. And until next week, I'll see you in the comments. Bye-bye.